Pokemon can obviously have a maximum of 2 types. Typings are obviously meant to work together with the rest of the Pokemon's attributes, like its appearance, its move pool, its ability, and its stats. However, there are Pokemon where, when you examine closer, it appears that they have more in common with another typing than their official typing. Sometimes that has to do with their lore. However, we will be exploring the aspects that are purely competitive. So things like Lugia being an honorary water-type Pokemon because it's known as the Guardian of the Sea, or it's been seen in the anime and in the games in the sea, won't be things that I'll be considering here, since those aren't really competitive things at all. First off is Koraidon. Koraidon is officially a dragon fighting type. His best stab dragon type moves are Dragon Claw, Scale Shot, and Outrage, with Scale Shot loaded dice set being his most popular one, and his best stab fighting type move being Collision Course, Low Kick, and Close Combat. Koraidon has managed to be a thorn at the side of some of historically the best Pokemon around, like Kyogre, Necrozma Duskmane, etc., and has an amazing speed tier of 135. That, combined with his often ran item of Scarf, it outspeeds some of the most popular Pokemon, like Zacian or Scarf Kyogre. Now that's all impressive, but why do I say that he's an honorary fire type? Well, let's take a look at Koraidon's ability, Orichalcum Pulse. It's an ability that summons Sunny Day, boosting his attack by 1.3. Koraidon also has access to Flare Blitz and Flame Charge, 2 great physical fire type moves. In his 135 base attack stat, it really hurts to be hit by those attacks. It's basically an honorary fire type because of those things. However, Terra Fire is its most common ran Terra type, because since it already gets Sunny Day automatically set up by its ability, plus those 2 great stat moves, that Terra becomes an obvious choice. It's a great way to get rid of Pokemon like Necrozma Duskmane, even defensive variants of them. It's so popular, I would say it's ran a solid 80% of the time. One of the other more common Terra types is usually Terra Ghost, but it doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of popularity because of the huge offensive boost that Terra Fire gets Koraidon. Terra Ghost is used mainly as a defensive thing, because see, one of the few things that Koraidon has to watch out for is his extreme speed Arceus. So Terra Ghost helps with that, since obviously ghosts are immune to normal type moves. But the offensive boost that Terra Fire gets Koraidon is far more beneficial. Plus, having to be protected by extreme speed is a far more situational thing. It makes more sense to just run Terra Fire, which is beneficial a solid 90% of the time. Next, I would say is Palafin, who resembles a fighting type. Palafin was once an OU ranked Pokemon, but it was banned to Ubers. Before it was unbanned again to OU because it wasn't cutting it there, so we decided, yeah, let the Dolphin on steroids back in. However, standard play was a little bit too easy for him, and then we banned him again. So let's talk about the set that got him banned. Because while his stats were great, there was a set that made him seemingly impossible to break through and break down. It's the reason why I consider him an honorary fighting type. It's not just his absurdly high 160 physical attack stat. This thing boasts a really impressive set that made him so hard to defeat. It was Bulk Up, Drain Punch with Leftovers, and Wave Crash. Combine that with his already impressive natural bulk and his decent speed stat, it made him far more reliable and resistant than he already was. Drain Punch gave him reliable recovery. The reason I say that he's an honorary fighting type is because Drain Punch plus that 160 physical attack stat made his Drain Punch hurt pretty much as any other stab fighting type move would. Next is Noctowl. Noctowl, most people think is a psychic type, but mostly because of the anime. See, Ash's shiny Noctowl was always seen using psychic type attacks, and just generally had a psychic adjacent theme and psychic adjacent vibe to it. But this is a competitive Pokemon channel, at least most of the time. Noctowl is a normal flying type. Like most flying types, actually, big surprise. It's much like the last Pokemon, in the sense that its move pool is the reason I kind of consider him an honorary psychic type. Noctowl has never been a super competitively viable Pokemon. It debuted in the PU tier, and no wonder it did. It has pretty terrible stats and a very common typing that doesn't do much defensively or offensively. Stat-wise, it's also an incredibly underwhelming Pokemon, not having even a single stat that particularly stands out. Its highest attack stat is 100, and his lowest stat is his attack and defense, both at a terrible 50. There really is nothing particularly great or interesting except for his honorary typing, like I mentioned. I attribute Psychic to its move pool, like I said, especially in random battles where some of its most common sets are Calm Mind sets. It also has access to Hypnosis, giving it a bit of a niche as a sleeper. And another Psychic type move that it runs is just Psychic. Psychic type moves are arguably some of the best moves that he has, besides Roost, which is a flying type move. But it doesn't have any great normal type moves. Flying wise, it has Roost, like I said, in Hurricane, but that's very low accuracy. Good luck landing one of those. And normal wise, his best moves are, well, nothing actually. He has no particularly good normal type moves. The only time he ever really ran normal type moves is when it would maybe run Return in the early gens, but even then it was more likely to run some variant of the hidden powers or another specially offensive move because at that time pre-Gen 4, Normal was a purely physical typing, and it has a very low physical attack stat like we previously stated. He's far more psychic flying than normal flying. Next is Empoleon. Empoleon is tied for the best Sinnoh starter competitively with Infernape, which is funny because usually he's the least favorite Sinnoh starter, with Torterra having a bit more popularity than him, because Torterra has an objectively cool design. In Empoleon, he kind of looks like he's wearing a layered tuxedo made out of steel that fits awkwardly since the last time he wore it because he gained too much weight. But yeah, anyways, Steel and Water is a great typing. It's resistant to a total of 10 types, the vast majority of which are very relevant, especially in the landscape of DPPOU. Admittedly, the reason for this Pokemon's honorary typing is based maybe just a bit more on its design than anything. I know I said I wouldn't do that, but I lied. The Ice type has long been attached to Empoleon though, since its inception. Let me explain. Even though Empoleon has a great defensive typing, offensively, one of the best moves that Empoleon had access to was Ice Beam. It was a great weapon to hit common threats like Dragonite, Latias, Breloom, and Celebi in DPPOU, who would have otherwise resisted its best stat move in Hydro Pump. That's why I say that it feels a lot like an honorary Ice type, because I attributed a lot to this Ice Beam sets. Next is Dhelmise. Del has a pretty cool concept, I think. It's the wheel of, or I don't know if it's called the wheel, but I'm not searching up what it's called, the wheel of an abandoned pirate ship. But most interestingly, it has a signature move that doesn't really match with its typing. Del has a typing of Grass and Ghost, which offensively is pretty great. It hits Ground, Rock, Ghost, Psychic, and Water super effectively. But arguably, and by arguably I mean objectively speaking, what would have been a better typing for him would have been Grass Steel. Defensively, Grass Steel is one of the best typings in the game, supported pretty iconically and infamously by Ferrothorn, who has a total of 9 resistances and 1 immunity, comprising of Normal, Rock, Steel, Water, Grass, Electric, Psychic, Dragon, and Fairy, and of course an immunity to Poison. Dhelmise's signature move is Anchor Shot, an 80 base power move that prevents the target from switching out. Off its 131 base attack stat, that hits really hard, but you know how it would hit harder? It was a stab move. Right now, Del isn't in Gen 9 because of Dexit, but in Generation 8, it wasn't particularly impressive because while it certainly has certain impressive attributes, it's really slow and has a bad typing defensively, being weak to common typings like Flying, Ghost, Fire, Ice, and Dark. If it was a Steel and Grass type, it wouldn't have to deal with that, and its low speed stat wouldn't be much of an issue because it would be much more defensively oriented. Not only having a good stab move, but it could be a much better utility mon, since it already has access to hazards like Stealth Rock. Offensively, Steel isn't as good of a typing as Ghost and Grass, but I argue that the defensive value of Grass and Steel is higher than the offensive value of Ghost and Grass. Next is Cresselia. There is a certain subset of Pokemon, usually Psychic type Pokemon, that if they had been introduced in Generation 6 or post Gen 6, they would have been Fairy types. Now, some Pokemon did get that type change, like Azumarill gaining the Fairy type, or Granbull getting the Fairy type, but pretty iconically, the Clefairy line going from Mono Normal or to Mono Fairy. However, a Pokemon that feels like they could have been very much part Fairy or just pure Fairy is Cresselia. Cresselia was introduced in Generation 4, and it was one of those weird Pokemon that could and would be ranked UU, UBL, or OU, but could also work very well in the Uber tier. It was often compared to Lugia because that's how good it was defensively. At least at the time. Lugia is pretty bad now. But anyways, I'm talking about Pokemon like Skeledridge, Clodsire, Blissey, and Chansey. And if you've noticed, all of these Pokemon have something in common, which is that they are all defensive Pokemon, which would make sense. If you're a Pokemon that is offensively on par with Uber Mons, then you would be ranked Uber. So obviously Cresselia falls into that category of good defensive Mons legal in the lower tiers. And in DPP Uber, it was great. It had a great ability in Levitate, and you would only need to look at its stats once to see that it was very bulky. You could almost never take this thing down in one hit. However, it couldn't keep up and went to UBL, and then it went to RU, and it looked like it was just going to keep falling lower and lower and lower until eventually it would fall into obscurity. But then it rose to UU in Generation 6, which was weird because it didn't gain a new typing or a new ability, so what happened? Well, what changed was that it gained 2 new moves in Moonlight and Moonblast. Moonlight was huge for it, because while it was a great defensive Pokemon that was really hard to take down, it didn't have reliable recovery, which is a huge loss for a defensive Pokemon, who literally their whole MO is that they are staying alive and they're going to block your Pokemon no matter what. And plus, Moonblast finally meant that it had a great offensive move. Since Psyshock and Psychic are good stat moves for the Psychic type, yes, Psychic isn't really a good offensive typing, so it's not really a surprise that the Fairy typing is the most popular Terra type for it as well. Its most impressive attributes, besides its ability, are Fairy related, since Fairy is a great offensive typing, yes, but it's also arguably, and by arguably I mean objectively, a better defensive typing than anything, being immune to the Dragon type. That's why I say that it's an honorary Fairy type. This was my list of Pokemon that have quote-unquote an honorary typing. This list was kind of difficult to make because lots of Pokemon who lots of people say have an honorary typing are mostly related to their physical appearance, like Charizard being quote-unquote a dragon type, or Flygon resembling a bug type, or Dragalge resembling a water type because you literally catch it in different bodies of water and it's literally a piece of seaweed. So I tried to stick to the competitive aspects as much as possible. Let me know if I missed any because I know I must have, and maybe in the future I can do a similar theme, but I base it more on the appearance of the Pokemon rather than just the moves.